Entering this 2023 NBA offseason, there's no other young team who are in a more reasonable position to speed up their rebuilding process than the OKC Thunder. The team already won 40 games last season and were just one win away from being the 8th-seeded team in the Western Conference. However, instead of going after expensive free agents and making blockbuster trades, OKC approached this crucial offseason with only the future in mind. A future wherein the prime years of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and the rest of the team's young core pieces would overlap within the roster. And being a small market team, the front office knew that the only way to make this happen was to smartly and efficiently use the three roster building resources that they have control over, which are players, cap space, and draft assets. GM Sam Presti also knew that this type of smart approach to roster building held even more importance this 2023 offseason, especially with the implementation of the NBA's new collective bargaining agreement, which just took effect last July 1st. Overall, this new CBA made a couple of rule changes. It made amendments to the length and amount of contract extensions that could be signed by players, it created a brand new luxury tax apron for overspending teams, and it even established a minimum floor amount that teams needed to spend in the offseason. So what's good everyone, it's Real Balls here, and in this video, we'll look into how the OKC Thunder navigated the free agent and trade markets this offseason in the context of those new CBA rules to be able to build a winning roster both in the short and the long term. So let's get to it. For the upcoming 2023 to 2024 season, the NBA set the salary cap at $136 million, and for context, the Thunder entered the offseason with only $104 million in guaranteed salaries, meaning the team basically still had around $32 million in cap space that they could spend this summer. The thing is, the past couple of years, OKC would have comfortably entered the brand new season with their payroll being way below the cap. But under this rule created under the new CBA, teams should now have spent at least 90% of the salary cap by the start of the brand new season. Otherwise, the remaining amount of money that they haven't spent will basically just be considered useless for further transactions. Unlike before wherein, teams can still basically make trades during the middle of the season using the remaining cap money. Well, this offseason, the established minimum salary amount needed to be spent by teams is $122.4 million, and with OKC's payroll, they basically still had to spend around $18 million more to reach that amount. And the thing is, the Thunder could have easily made one big free agent signing to reach the cap floor or to even use up their entire cap space just as teams like the Houston Rockets did. But the Thunder instead used the more creative strategy of absorbing unwanted contracts from other teams via trade while also acquiring draft capital in return. First, OKC's biggest cap space maneuver actually came on draft night. They used more than half of their cap space to take on Bertans and his $17 million salary for next season from Dallas. But as compensation for clearing their books, the Mavs enabled OKC to move up 2 spots in the draft at number 10, and by doing so, the Thunder made sure that they got the prospect they wanted in Kentucky combo guard Cason Wallace. And while taking on Bertans' $17 million contract might look like a steep price to pay for Cason Wallace, it was $17 million that OKC had to spend this offseason anyway, and even if they don't trade Bertans, OKC could still keep their books clean moving forward because he's only guaranteed $5 million for the 2024 to 2025 season before his contract expires. But moving on, with cap space still available, the Thunder made more trades, but this time, they focused on acquiring additional draft capital. First, OKC sent cash considerations to the Miami Heat, and in exchange, they acquired Victor Oladipo and his expiring $9.4 million contract, together with second-round picks in 2029 and 2030. Subsequently, OKC also traded for Patty Mills from the Houston Rockets, and in return for taking on his expiring $6.8 million salary, the Thunder also received second-round picks in 2024, 2029, and 2030. Now, OKC was actually out of cap room after briefly acquiring Patty Mills' contract, but the thing is, they were still around $20 million under the tax line, meaning they could still use that extra space to further generate draft assets. And that's exactly what they did when OKC traded Patty Mills to Atlanta, and in exchange, they acquired Rudy Gay's expiring $6.5 million salary, together with TyTy Washington, Usman Garuba, and their near minimum expiring deals, as well as another unspecified future second-round pick. I think this is where you can see the genius of the Thunder's front office. They used cap money that they had to spend anyway to be be able to acquire additional draft capital. And yes, they had to absorb unwanted player contracts in the process, but if you come to think of it, these contracts are all basically expiring deals that could either be traded or straight up waived, just like what they did with Rudy Gay. So either way, acquiring them still wouldn't hurt the team's future cap situation. But for sure, people might be wondering, what will OKC even do with all these draft picks that they have in the first place? The Thunder own 15 first-round picks and 20 second-round picks over the next 7 years. But while all those assets may seem excessive, I think we can see how draft picks just became far more valuable when looking at how the new CBA implemented the new rule creating a second luxury tax apron. Well, this new rule basically states that any team whose payroll goes beyond the second tax threshold set at $17.5 million above the luxury tax line would have to face severe penalties, which include losing access to their taxpayer mid-level exemption, being unable to sign players from the buyout market, as well as being prohibited from aggregating player salaries in a trade. So basically, with these privileges taken away from them, highly overspending teams like the Warriors, Lakers, or Clippers will now have very limited avenues in terms of filling out the back ends of the rosters. And as a result, these teams will now want to own more draft picks, because draft picks are a guaranteed way to add players on controllable deals to fill out their rotations. Well, even second round picks just generated more spending power nowadays because the new CBA also created a new second round pick exception. Basically, under the previous CBA, teams are unable to sign their second round selections for more than a 2-year guaranteed rookie contract unless they use part of their mid-level exception to do that. But under the new CBA, teams are now allowed to sign their second round selections to guaranteed rookie contracts that last up to 3 or even 4 years, even without having to use their mid-level exception, which basically makes second round picks even more valuable assets in terms of roster building nowadays. This is now where OKC's advantage comes in, as they can now basically use their stockpile of draft assets as trade leverage in a lot of ways, most especially when the time comes that their roster starts to become more expensive in a couple of seasons. Even without having money to sign free agents, they can use a lot of these picks to either draft young talent to complement their core or trade these picks for veteran players down the line. Crazy thing is, despite the ton of maneuvering they did with their cap space this offseason, because OKC still isn't a luxury tax team, they still own a room exception, which is basically an exception which allows non-tax teams to sign a free agent for up to 3 years without having to use more of their cap space. And the Thunder are reportedly going to use this exception to sign 6'5" Serbian guard Vasilije Micic, who earlier this offseason has reportedly agreed to a 3-year $23.5 million deal with OKC. Well, I think for the Thunder, being able to add one of the best players to come out of Europe over the past couple of years for this amount is just basically a steal. As in Micic, OKC is getting an experienced 29-year-old player who's a 2-time EuroLeague champion, a 2-time EuroLeague Finals MVP, and who's also the overall MVP of the 2021 EuroLeague season. Basically, this guy has dominated some of the toughest basketball competitions in the world outside of the NBA as a lead ball handler, a primary decision maker, and a reliable three-level scorer. In 34 games last season playing for Turkish club Efes, Micic averaged 17.5 points, 4.6 assists, and 2.7 rebounds, which might not look like eye-popping stats, but looking at the advanced numbers in comparison to all EuroLeague players last season, Micic ranked in the 90th percentile in terms of half-court offense production, and also in the 97th percentile in terms of production as a pick-and-roll ball handler, all while converting 45% of all his catch-and-shoot three-point attempts as well. So in OKC, I think Micic would be ready to take on primary ball handling and scoring duties coming off the bench right from day one. But most importantly, with him on the team, Coach Daigneault should now be able to stagger the minutes of Shai, Giddey, and J-Dub more consistently. Even with two of those guys on the bench, playing Micic with at least one of them should ensure that OKC would always have at least two solid on-ball decision makers on the floor at all times. But with Micic joining the team, as well as with the addition of Australian forward Jack White, who the Thunder also signed to a 2-year deal, OKC now have a roster crunch with 21 players currently on the team, and they'd have to trim down the roster to 15 players by opening night. The good thing is, the season's still a couple months away, and OKC's still around $16 million below the tax line. They could still use that available space to acquire a couple more second-round picks by trading some of their players. So I think between now and September, we should expect OKC to make a couple more money trades, provided those trades wouldn't impact their future cap situation, which definitely just became even more delicate with new rules set by the new CBA regarding contract extensions. Cause looking at it, SGA is already on a max deal which would pay him above $35 million annually until his contract expires in 2027. But then under the new CBA, contract extensions for veteran players like him could also now start with a 40% increase on the first year of a new deal, up from just a 20% increase under the previous CBA. Well, if any, this rule could actually help increase OKC's chances of keeping Shai, as instead of OKC allowing him to become a free agent in 2027, now with this new CBA rule, as early as the 2026 offseason, OKC would already be able to offer Shai a competitive extension based on the aforementioned salary increase. This basically allows Shai to get paid competitively on his next contract even if he resigns with OKC earlier than expected, and for OKC, this also lessens the risk of them losing their star player to a team with more money during free agency. But before even having to worry about that, next offseason, Josh Giddey will already be eligible to sign his own extension, and I think considering how guys like Tyler Herro and Jordan Poole got extensions worth $30 and $32 million annually on average, which is around 22% of the salary cap, considering Giddey's higher draft position and of course the skill set that he brings, I'm predicting he'll get 25% of the cap, which is already max money. So I think we might be looking at a 5-year $175 million or even a 5-year $200 million extension here for Giddey. But the thing is, the offseason after, which is in 2025, OKC will also have to look into potential extensions for J-Dub and Chet Holmgren. Well, only time will tell if they'll be worthy of max extensions, but again, things just got more complicated under the new CBA. Because previously, first-round picks who aren't getting the max can only be extended for up to 4 years on their rookie extensions. But under the new CBA, players drafted in the first round like Chet and J-Dub are now allowed to sign full 5-year rookie extensions even if they're not necessarily getting max money. Well, sure, keeping homegrown talent under the new CBA just got easier as those rules are basically centered around giving teams longer control on the players they drafted. But still, for a small market team like OKC, keeping all these players together would still come with a huge price tag. And I think this is why Sam Presti has been doubling down on patience. He's keeping the books clean so when the time comes, he can eventually pay the team's core pieces, while at the same time, he's continuing to acquire more draft assets which he can use in a potential trade for a star talent whenever he believes that OKC is already ready to contend. I'm just totally convinced that while the rest of the NBA are playing checkers, the Thunder's front office is playing chess, as instead of targeting a few more additional wins in the regular season, OKC is rather focused on building an extended championship contention window that could last for at least the next 10 years. So thank you guys if you've actually made it this far into the video, and what can you say about the OKC Thunder's moves this 2023 offseason? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this is Real Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.